Chapter 1. Whispers Behind the Lace. The November afternoon had that particular quality of light that comes to English villages in late autumn when the sun filters through bare branches and catches the last chrysanthemums nodding in cottage gardens. Miss Jane Marple paused at the gate of Catman Cottage, her keen blue eyes taking in the neat front garden and the pristine lace curtains that adorned every window of the small dwelling. "Really, Jane," said Lady Bantry, adjusting her fur stole against the crisp air, "I do think you might make an effort with poor Mrs. Vale. She's been quite alone since her husband died, except for those cats of hers. Why, see? 13 cats," murmured Miss Marple thoughtfully, her gloved hand resting on the gate latch. "Such a precise number. There's she. Then, unlucky, I should think," Lady Bantry replied with a slight shudder, "though I suppose she finds them company enough. Aye." The front door of Catman Cottage opened before they could ring, and a small, neat woman in her 60s appeared. Mrs. Mercy Vale had the sort of face that spoke of quiet determination and meticulous habits. Her grey hair was arranged with mathematical precision, and her apron bore not a single wrinkle. "Lady Bantry, how good of you to call." "Mrs." Vale said, her voice carrying the faint trace of better days. "And Miss Marple, I've heard so much about you from dear Mrs. Clement. How is mind?" As they were ushered into the sitting-room, Miss Marple noticed immediately the sounds that pervaded the cottage. There was a gentle symphony of tiny bells, each with its own distinct note, creating a delicate chiming that seemed to follow their hostess wherever she moved. "You'll forgive the noise, Mrs." Vale said with an apologetic smile. "My little companions wear bells so I can keep track of them. Each one has a different note. You see, it makes counting so much easier." He said of the most have. The sitting-room was immaculate, with antimacassars precisely placed on the furniture, and not a speck of cat hair to be seen. Through the window, Miss Marple could observe several cats moving about the garden with that peculiar, purposeful manner that cats adopt when they have established routines. 13 cats must be quite a responsibility, Miss Marple observed gently. "Oh, but they're no trouble at all, Mrs." Vale replied, her eyes brightening. "They're fed at 7 sharp each evening, and they know their places perfectly. I count them by their bells as they come in. Such creatures of habit, cats are—" He's not haved to see news, but wide. Lady Bantry settled herself into a high-backed chair while Miss Marple chose a seat near the fire. A tabby cat with striking amber eyes leapt gracefully onto Mrs. Vale's lap, its bell chiming a soft A note that resonated like a miniature tuning fork. "This is Clover, Mrs." Vale explained, stroking the animal with delicate precision. "She came to me only last month, but she has settled in beautifully. You can tell her bell because it does not match any of the others. Where? Oh, here's Cray." Miss Marple's eyes lingered a moment on the tiny bell, noticing the faint tarnish upon its rim and the way the sound jarred slightly against the harmony of the others. She said nothing, merely filing the observation away in the quiet recesses of her mind. Tea was brought in by a brisk maid, and the conversation turned to village matters, the fate of the church roof fund, the quality of the grocer's new shipment of tea, and whether the vicar's sermon had been a touch too long the previous Sunday. Through it all, the gentle chiming of bells created a background music that no one but Miss Marple seemed to listen to. When at last Lady Bantry and Miss Marple took their leave, the November twilight had deepened, and a pale mist was beginning to rise from the fields. Miss Marple paused at the gate once more, her eyes thoughtful as they turned back toward the lace-curtained windows, now glowing softly with lamplight. "There is something about numbers, don't you think?" she said quietly. "Numbers, Jane?" Lady Bantry asked, puzzled. "Yes," Miss Marple murmured, her gaze still fixed on the cottage. 13 cats, 13 bells, and one that sounds quite out of tune. He's not a dear. He's not a dear's phrase I posed to NDN. Lady Bantry settled herself into a high-backed chair while Miss Marple chose a seat near the fire. A tabby cat with striking amber eyes leapt gracefully onto Mrs. Eber. Valet's lap, its bell chiming a soft A note that resonated like a miniature tuning fork. "This is Clover, Mrs. Vale explained, stroking the animal with delicate precision. "She came to me only last month, but she has settled in beautifully. You can tell her bell because it does not match any of the others. There's this quite." Miss Marple's eyes lingered a moment on the tiny bell, noticing the faint tarnish upon its rim and the way the sound jarred slightly against the harmony of the others. She said nothing, merely filing the observation away in the quiet recesses of her mind. Tea was brought in by a brisk maid, and the conversation turned to village matters, the fate of the church roof fund, the quality of the grocer's new shipment of tea, and whether the vicar's sermon had been a touch too long the previous Sunday. Through it all, the gentle chiming of bells created a background music that no one but Miss Marple seemed to listen to. When at last Lady Bantry and Miss Marple took their leave, the November twilight had deepened, and a pale mist was beginning to rise from the fields. Miss Marple paused at the gate once more, her eyes thoughtful as they turned back toward the lace-curtained windows, now glowing softly with lamplight. "There is something about numbers, don't you think?" she said quietly. "Numbers, Jane?" Lady Bantry asked, puzzled. "Yes," Miss Marple murmured, her gaze still fixed on the cottage. 13 cats, 13 bells, and one that sounds quite out of tune, Conid. Space I groomer. Toi se tiep tuk ne fan kui, ko chapter 1, de tronver, ban komon toi, gui luen hong he, de bandok vakim tra truk. You said, okay. Chat GPT said, Chapter 1, Whispers Behind the Lace Conclusion. They had scarcely finished admiring the immaculate room when voices sounded in the front garden. Quick steps on the path, and a brisk knock at the door. "That will be my nephew, Gavin." "Mrs." Vale said, and Miss Marple detected a slight tightening about the eyes, the kind that tells of old anxieties that have learned to sit quietly until roused. "He teaches music in the village. A talented boy, but rather well. He has his difficulties. This one Nornane." Gavin Vale entered with barely concealed irritation. A thin, nervous man in his 30s, whose clothes were well made but carefully mended, whose shoes had been polished to disguise their age. "Aunt Mercy," he said without preamble, "I do hope you will reconsider what I said yesterday about those animals. The cottage reeks of cat, and the neighbors are beginning to talk. But this, the neighbors have always talked." "Dear Mrs." Vale returned with gentle firmness. "And my cats are perfectly clean. Is not his filers, 8 hams. It's not just the smell," Gavin continued. color rising in his face. It's the expense. The veterinary bills. And everyone knows you're planning to leave money to that animal hospital. It's not right. Aunt Mercy. Family should come first. He said, "Laugh." Miss Marple watched him with mild attention, the way one observes a passing shower, noting its direction and force. The signs of genteel poverty were unmistakable, and the resentment that accompanies it no less so. "We have visitors. Gavin." "Mrs. Ipay," Vale said quietly. But the young man seemed beyond caring for social niceties. "I'm sorry. Ladies. But this is important. Aunt Mercy. You simply must reconsider this ridiculous notion of leaving everything to Dr. Eyre. Cardew's Animal Hospital. I'm your only living relative." He burst. "Before Mrs." Vale could reply. Another voice called from the garden, "Mrs. Vale. I hope I'm not intruding. May just in class, Doctor." Hugh Cardew appeared in the doorway, a robust man in his 40s, with a hearty manner that inspired confidence in anxious pet owners. He carried a black medical bag, and his tweeds spoke of country respectability. "Dr. Cardew, Mrs." Vale said, her face brightening. "How kind of you to call. I do hope nothing is wrong with any of my darlings." "Ah, not at all. Not at all," he replied jovially. "I brought some flea powder I thought you might find useful. These autumn months can be trying for our feline friends." "Ah, yes, too, dear." Gavin's expression darkened. "Dr. Cardew, I suppose you've come to discuss my aunt's proposed legacy to your hospital. Kersley of Lice do. Now, young man," said the veterinary surgeon pleasantly but firmly, "your aunt's charitable intentions are entirely her own affair. I merely provide medical care for her cats. Nay, medical care that costs a pretty penny," Gavin muttered. Miss Marple's eyes, which seldom missed small things, had observed that Dr. Cardew's jacket pocket bulged slightly. A fine length of waxed cord protruded from his notebook. "For muzzles," he explained cheerfully when he caught her glance. "Some of the larger dogs can be quite troublesome during examinations. And a César on the César, and a César. Attention. Fragile as spun glass, and almost as bright. Lay across the room when the back door opened and a sturdy woman entered with marketing on her arm. "I'll just put these away." "Ma'am," she said to Mrs. Became. "Vale." But her sharp eyes took in the company with evident interest. "Mrs. Dorcas Finch comes in daily." "Mrs." Vale explained. "I don't know what I should do without her, especially when it comes to managing 13 cats. Using gore. Cunningly. 13 saucers to wash every day." "Mrs." Finch observed with resigned good humor. "Each one numbered on the bottom so the cats know their places. Very particular about routine is Mrs. L.A. Vale. They not daisies." "How very organized," Miss Marple said, and her attention sharpened in that unobtrusive way of hers that never seemed like attention at all. "Oh, yes," said Mrs. Vale with pride. "Each cat has its own place on the kitchen dresser. I count them in by their bells as they come for their evening meal. It works perfectly. S, as if summoned by mention of food." Several cats materialized with that purposeful air cats adopt when they have established routines. The chiming of their bells formed a gentle music, Yet, to a musical ear, and Miss Marple's was more musical than most, one bell rang with a slightly different pitch, not quite part of the original set. "What a lovely tortoise shell," she remarked, indicating a striking cat that had just slipped in through a newly fitted flap in the back door. "That's Clover," said Mrs. "Varlet with fondness. Doctor, Cardew brought her to me just recently, a 13th addition to my family, and have maided many. The tea's no repping place, dear. 13 was quite enough," Gavin muttered, but his aunt ignored him. Miss Marple looked more closely. The collar upon Clover's neck was newer than the rest, the leather supple and uncracked, while the older cats wore collars gently worn by years of service. The bell's tone, too, was not quite in harmony with the others. She said nothing, for there is a time to speak and a time to listen, and Miss Marple seldom confused the two. The afternoon light began to fade. "Doctor." Cardew took his leave with pleasant assurances and bicycled away. Gavin departed soon after in ill temper, having won no ground. "Such a difficult boy." "Mrs." Vale sighed, standing at the window to watch him down the path. "But blood is blood, I suppose." "No." "Indeed," Miss Marple murmured, "though I have often found that the truest family may be discovered in the most unexpected places. Can he stay?" They made their farewells, and as they did so, "Mrs." Vale mentioned casually, but with hands that trembled ever so slightly that her solicitor, Mr. Reid, Lionel Pratt, would be calling on the morrow to discuss a codicil to her will. "Just some small adjustments," she said. "Nothing that need concern anyone." They? Miss Marple, whose memory was capacious and whose interest in human nature inexhaustible, tucked away the tremor as carefully as one tucks away a pin. Such small things fasten larger garments than one would think. Outside, Whisper Lane lay in quiet, a silver mist beginning to gather among the hedges. The last thing they heard as they walked away was the delicate symphony of 13 bells, each with its own voice, counting out the evening routine of Catman Cottage. Chapter 2. The 13th Bell. The following morning broke damp and chill, with a thin drizzle that coated the hedges in pearls and turned the cobblestones slick beneath careful feet. Miss Marple, wrapped in her serviceable grey coat, made her way toward the High Street, ostensibly to fetch wool from the drapers, but in truth because she knew the solicitor was expected at Catman Cottage. She had long since discovered that errands, properly chosen, often coincided with the very moments when human nature revealed itself most plainly. Sure enough, as the church clock struck 11, Mr. Lionel Pratt came down the lane, a thin, precise man whose umbrella was furled with mathematical neatness despite the drizzle. He touched his bowler hat politely as he passed Miss Marple. "Good morning, Miss Marple," he said. "A damp day for one's constitution. But Mrs. Vale awaits, and business must be attended to." "Is this?" "Indeed," Miss Marple replied, her mild smile concealing a mind that catalogued details with the accuracy of a ledger. She noted the briefcase clasped firmly in his hand and the faint air of reluctance that clung to his professional cheer. "From the hedge across the lane?" Miss Marple heard the now familiar chiming of bells. 1, 2, 3, 4. The notes fell into their accustomed harmony until the last, the newest, sounded with that faint discord. The 13th bell, out of tune with the rest. Inside the cottage, Mr. Pratt was shown into the blue parlour, its curtains drawn against the drizzle. Mrs. Vale greeted him with her usual meticulous courtesy, pouring tea with a hand that, though steady, seemed thinner than the day before. "I trust all is in order?" she asked quietly. "Quite so, Mr. Pratt replied, opening his case. "The codicil merely affirms your intention to leave the bulk of your estate to the St. Anselm's Animal Hospital, with a modest annuity for your nephew. A sensible arrangement, if I may say so. Would Olive then—" Mrs. Vale's lips pressed together. "Gavin will not think it sensible. But he must learn that devotion has its claims as well as blood. Have her." At that moment, the maid brought in a tray of saucers, each neatly numbered upon its underside. The cats began filing in, bells chiming as they leapt to their accustomed places. Clover, the newest, came last, her bell jangling a note that clashed against the harmony like a discordant violin string. "Do forgive the interruption, Mrs." Vale murmured. "Routine must be observed. 9 hide us to bed." "Of course," said Mr. Day. Pratt, though he cast a faintly disapproving glance at the animals. One sees what is meant by responsibility. Escruso. Through the window, a shadow passed the figure of Gavin Vale, loitering at the gate with a stormy expression. He had not been invited, but his presence hung about the cottage like damp fog, unwelcome yet difficult to ignore. Mrs. Vale signed the papers with neat precision, her penmanship as meticulous as her household. Mr. Pratt gathered them away, bowed, and took his leave. When the door closed behind him, Mrs. Vale stood for a long moment, listening to the fading chime of bells as the cats lapped at their saucers. Then she turned to the newest arrival, Clover, and her smile faltered ever so slightly. The bell's tone jarred again in her ears, and for the first time, Mrs. Vale seemed uneasy in her own house. That evening, Miss Marple sat by her cottage fire with her knitting, but her thoughts wandered inevitably back to Catman Cottage. Numbers and patterns were as much a part of her life as dropped stitches and teacups, and the discordant 13th bell troubled her like a note sung out of key in an otherwise harmonious choir. She remembered Mrs. Vale's hand, steady when it signed the codicil, yet trembling ever so slightly when she spoke of her nephew. She remembered the eager confidence of Dr. Cardew, whose pockets bulged with veterinary paraphernalia, and the mutinous lines around Gavin's mouth when he left the cottage in a storm of discontent. It was not any one fact that disturbed Miss Marple. It was the way the facts fitted or failed to fit together. The next morning brought another visit, this time from Dr. Cardew himself. His bicycle leaned against the hedge, tires dripping with mist, while he bustled into the cottage carrying a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. "Medicine for Clover," he explained cheerfully. "She seems a delicate creature, though nothing a little tonic cannot put right. A gift. Of course. No charge. This is a latest Beludeds." Mrs. Vale accepted the parcel with gratitude, though her eyes darted nervously toward the window where Gavin's figure could once again be glimpsed, lingering in sullen watchfulness. "I wish you would not stand about so," she called sharply through the glass. "It unsettles the cats." "Nodda," They unsettle me, Gavin retorted. You'll regret this obsession. Aunt Mercy. Mark my words. I do never distinctly— Miss Marple, passing along the lane with her knitting bag, raised a hand in greeting. Gavin scowled and departed without a word. Dr. Cardew, however, was all affability, tipping his hat and offering Miss Marple a kindly word. Delicate creatures. Cats, he said. They thrive on regularity. It is disruption that does them harm. Anyfor. Yes, Miss Marple agreed mildly. So too with human beings. I think we grow accustomed to certain habits. A new note in an old tune can sound very strange indeed. Breeze Bly. Dr. Cardew looked faintly puzzled, then laughed, as though humouring an elderly lady's whimsy. But Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the brown paper parcel in Mrs. Vale's hand, noting the faint medicinal scent that wafted from it, sharp and metallic beneath the brown sugar of Dr. Cardew's geniality. That night, as the church clock struck 9, a muffled cry startled the neighbours. Lights flickered in the windows of Catman Cottage. The maid, white-faced, ran to the vicarage, shouting for help. By the time assistance arrived, Mrs. Place, Vale lay slumped in her chair by the fire, her knitting fallen to the floor, her lap empty of the tabby that had so often occupied it. The chiming of bells echoed eerily through the room, but one Clover's rang louder, harsher, as though it marked not routine but calamity. Miss Marple, summoned with the vicar and Lady Bantry, looked once at the still figure of Mrs. Sex Vale, and then at the circle of cats, their bells chiming in disordered chorus. She said nothing, but her eyes sharpened with that peculiar brightness they always assumed at the scent of wrongdoing. Inspector Slack arrived not long after, his heavy boots sounding on the flagstones, his manner brisk and faintly impatient. He greeted Miss Marple with a curt nod, though he had long since learned that her presence usually meant his work would become both easier and more complicated at the same time. Well, he muttered, bending over the still figure of Mrs. Vale. Looks like heart failure to me. Elderly lady. Plenty of strain. Nerves frayed by cats and quarrelsome relatives. Nothing very mysterious about it. That for Verma. Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked softly in her bag. Perhaps not, she said gently. But one should not overlook small things. They often prove the hinge upon which larger doors swing. The 7 days. The maid wrung her hands, insisting that her mistress had seemed in good health only hours before. Gavin Vale, summoned by the commotion, entered with dramatic haste, his face a mask of shock that did not entirely conceal the flicker of calculation in his eyes. "My poor aunt," he exclaimed. "I told her those cats would be the death of her. And what of me? Her only kin. What am I to do now? Josiah, don't distress yourself. Mr. Vale." "Inspector Slack," said brusquely. "Your aunt's solicitor was here yesterday. I gather we'll need to see the papers. Routine matter. And is Psalm and Tom—" At the mention of the codicil, Gavin's mouth tightened. Miss Marple noticed, too, the way his eyes shifted toward the corner where Clover sat, tail curled neatly about her paws, her bell chiming that peculiar discordant note. Dr. Cardew arrived shortly after, all sympathetic exclamations and professional concern. He examined the body, pronouncing with solemn certainty that heart failure was indeed the cause. Yet even as he spoke, Miss Marple caught the faintest scent of something bitter, metallic, clinging to the air near Mrs. Vale's teacup. She said nothing. She rarely did. At first. Instead, she let her eyes wander to the numbered saucers lined upon the dresser, to the lace curtains that stirred faintly in the draught, and most of all to Clover, whose bell still rang just a fraction out of tune with the rest. In the hush that followed, as Inspector Slack made his notes and the maid sobbed quietly into her apron, Miss Marple folded her hands and thought of numbers, bells, and habits that once disturbed could point the way to darker truths. The 13th bell had chimed, and with it, the shadow of death had entered Catman Cottage. The blue parlour of Catman Cottage, with its lace-draped windows and primly arranged chairs, had an air of serenity that sat strangely with the presence of death. The fire still glowed in the grate, though its warmth seemed to mock the chill that had fallen over the room. Mrs. Varley's body had been carried upstairs, but her presence lingered in every folded antimacassar and polished teacup. Inspector Slack stood with his notebook, making brisk entries, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Nothing out of the ordinary," he muttered. "Elderly woman. Weak heart. Sudden collapse. Solicitor called only yesterday. Nephew hovering about well. That's natural enough. Looks straightforward to me. This heaven had have heard. This." Miss Marple sat quietly near the fire, her hands folded in her lap. She appeared to be listening to the faint chiming of the cat's bells as they prowled restlessly. But in truth, her thoughts were elsewhere. She had noticed, for instance, that Clover, the newest of the cats, remained aloof from the others, her strange bell louder, harsher, as though it demanded attention. Mr. Lionel Pratt, the solicitor, arrived at Inspector Slack's summons. His umbrella dripped discreetly in the hall as he was shown into the parlour, his face composed in professional gravity. "I was with Mrs. Varley only yesterday," he said softly. "She seemed in good spirits, though naturally anxious to set her affairs in order. She signed the codicil without hesitation. Is into center visus torrenti usus." "And what does this codicil say?" Inspector Slack asked, his pencil poised. "That the residue of her estate is to pass to St. Saints, Anselm's Animal Hospital. Mr. Pratt explained. "A generous bequest indeed." Her nephew, Mr. Gavin Vale, is to receive an annuity of £100 a year, sufficient for his modest needs. And thinkums. Gavin, who had been listening from the corner, sprang up in indignation. An annuity. £100, while some hospital for mongrel beasts gets thousands. It's monstrous. Is garnered. Inspector Slack shot him a sharp glance. "Keep your temper." "Sir, your aunt's wishes were her own." Is never." Miss Marple's eyes moved gently from one face to another, the flushed indignation of Gavin, the lawyer's pinched precision, the inspector's practical impatience. She saw, too, the maid Dorcas Finch hovering by the door, her hands twisting in her apron, her eyes bright with fear. "What is it, Dorcas?" Miss Marple asked softly. "It's nothing. Ma'am." the maid stammered, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "Only that is, madam, had been uneasy these past few days," she said once. "If anything should happen to me, remember the bells." I didn't know what she meant. "It's Connadraid." The room fell into a brief silence, broken only by the chiming of Clover's discordant bell. Miss Marple inclined her head ever so slightly, as though a faint puzzle piece had slipped into place. Inspector Slack snorted. "Superstitious nonsense. Bells." "Indeed." The woman was devoted to her cats. "That's all. Is gift is sump." But Miss Marple, her blue eyes very bright, thought otherwise. She thought of numbers, of habits, of the delicate balance of routine, and of how easily routine could be disturbed when someone had a mind to disturb it. The afternoon wore on, and the parlour grew dim with the fading of the November light. Inspector Slack had summoned Dr. Cardew once more, partly for professional formality, and partly because the veterinary surgeon was, after all, a man accustomed to dealing with animals and their mistress alike. Dr. Cardew entered with his usual air of robust good humour, but his eyes flickered quickly about the room, taking in the drawn curtains, the solemn faces, and the conspicuous absence of Mrs. Vale. "A sad business, Inspector," he said gravely. "Mrs. Vale was devoted to her animals. A finer mistress they could not have had. I had warned her to spare herself excitement, for her heart was not strong. But she would not be persuaded. I have mice. You believe it was heart failure?" "Then?" Slack asked. "Beyond doubt." "Doctor," Cardew replied. "The end was sudden, painless. I am certain of it. I don't—" Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked softly, though she had not brought her work. The sound seemed to be in her mind alone, marking each word, each pause, each too ready assurance. "And this new cat Clover," Miss Marple said gently. "She has settled in well, I trust." "Is Iron—" Dr. Cardew smiled, though his eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Ah, yes. Clover was a little rescue. Stray. Abandoned. Poor creature. I thought Mrs. Vale's heart, her generous heart, might find comfort in giving her a home. She was delighted." "He's Narrated." "Yes," Miss Marple murmured. "So delighted that she mentioned it to us yesterday. I remember particularly the bell. Such a curious tone. Not quite in harmony with the others." "Is a Stephen." Gavin, who had been pacing restlessly, burst out. "What does it matter what tone the bell makes? The whole business is absurd. My aunt is dead. And you sit here talking of bells and cats while I— He broke off, his voice shaking with a mixture of anger and grief. Inspector Slack eyed him coldly. "We will come to you presently. Mr. Vale. Meanwhile, we will have facts, not feelings." Miss Marple's voice, mild and seemingly absent-minded, floated across the tension. "Facts are often found in very small places. Inspector. Sometimes in the sound of a bell. Sometimes in the habit of a cat. Sometimes in the way a cup is set upon a saucer. N'est-ce pas, ma dear?" The inspector made a sound of irritation, but he scribbled in his notebook all the same. "Mrs. Dorcas Finch," still hovering, blurted out suddenly. "It was her tea, I'm certain." She always said the cats kept her company. But last night she drank her tea alone in here. I brought it myself. I swear I saw nothing amiss. But she said it tasted bitter. When 80. A silence followed this statement, sharp and deep as the toll of a bell. Miss Marple's eyes softened, but their brightness deepened. She remembered the faint metallic scent she had noticed, clinging to the rim of the teacup. Clover's bell rang again, discordant, demanding attention. Inspector Slack seized upon the maid's words at once. Bitter, you say? Why did you not mention this earlier? Is the Enomonsis here? Dorcas Finch wrung her hands miserably. Because I thought it was just the tea itself. Sir, sometimes the new tins taste strange. I didn't want to make trouble. I veli B.C. Trouble, Slack barked. Your mistress is dead. Woman. And you speak of trouble. Then various cedars. Then various cedars. Miss Marple's voice interposed gently, like cool water upon hot iron. We must not be harsh. Inspector, people do not always understand the importance of small observations. Yet small things often point the way to truth. Way? She turned her gaze toward the tea tray still set upon the side table. The pot had cooled. The cups lay untouched, save one. Miss Marple rose, her movements quiet, and lifted the cup that had been Mrs. Veils. The faintest odor lingered there sharp. Acrid. Not at all. The fragrance of tea. Doctor. Cardew stepped forward hastily. Come now. Miss Marple. Tea goes off. You know. Leaves improperly stored, very common. Is if you is a fay? Perhaps, she said mildly, replacing the cup. And yet, I cannot help but notice how very clean the saucers are. Despite the number of cats in this household, so carefully washed, so neatly numbered. A woman of exact habits. A woman who would notice if anything were amiss. Is not Evers's noti fair? She noticed, Dorcas whispered. She said so. She said, if anything happens to me, remember the bells. Masking mase. The words hung in the parlour like a summons. Clover's bell chimed again. Discordant. Harsh. Miss Marple's eyes lingered upon the animal, then drifted slowly to Dr. Darm, Cardew, whose confident smile had stiffened ever so slightly. Inspector Slack looked from one to the other, irritation plain upon his face. I suppose, Miss Marple, you mean to tell us that a bell, a cat, and a teacup have something to do with this poor lady's death? Bide. Miss Marple resumed her seat, her hands folded. I should never presume to tell you anything, Inspector. But if I were you, I would not be too hasty to close my notebook. The fire crackled softly. The cats prowled, restless. Bells chiming in uneasy chorus, and in the blue parlour of Catman Cottage, the shadows lengthened, hinting that secrets once hidden behind lace were about to be drawn into the light. Chapter 4. Milk and Valerian. Inspector Slack arrived at Catman Cottage with the methodical efficiency that made him both respected and silently dreaded in equal measure. His heavy tread crunched over the gravel. His sharp rap sounded on the door. And Mrs. Vale straightened herself visibly before admitting him, as though neatness and courage were garments to be put on at a moment's notice. Doctor. Haddock had already come and gone once. leaving behind a sober pronouncement and the quiet gravity that follows any official word on death. Now he returned at Slack's request, and together they stood in the blue parlour. The room that seemed to hoard sunlight in its wallpaper, but could not push back the day's encroaching chill. "Nasty blow to the temple, Doctor," Haddock reported in a low voice, glancing toward the hearthrug where Mr. Pratt had lately fallen and been removed. "Could have proved fatal on its own, though the signs suggest a seizure or faintness beforehand. He might have risen too suddenly, gone light-headed, and struck his head against that brass doorstop. Nasty, yeah." Inspector Slack followed the doctor's gesture. The doorstop, shaped like a reclining cat, had toppled from its usual station and bore, near its base, a dark stain that needed no commentary. He crouched, considering. Locked room, they tell me. Window fast. Door bolted on the inside. Yet the lady says she struggled with the lock to get back in. Curious. I see. Curious indeed. Miss Marple murmured from her chair near the small table, her gaze not on the doorstop, but on a saucer set neatly to one side. "I wonder why there is milk in here." "Yes." Mrs. Vale, stationed on the threshold, as though uncertain whether to enter or flee, answered at once. "For the cats. If one slips in here when the door opens, I set out a little milk or they grow nervous and hide. I prefer to coax them rather than chase them. Is was and if wa." Miss Marple lifted the saucer carefully, and beneath it her fingers found a small muslin sachet, almost invisible against the table's polished wood. She raised it delicately and, with a thoughtful expression, pressed it between finger and thumb. A scent rose sweet, cloying, with a sly sharpness beneath. Dorcas Finch, who had drifted in from the kitchen against her better judgment, nodded vigorously. "Those little bags are Dr. Cardew's notion. He calls them flea sachets. Says they keep the cushions sweet. I've put one under every saucer, just as he advised." Valerian," Miss Marple said softly. "And perhaps other herbs? Cats find it most persuasive. Is FT2 way?" Inspector Slack straightened, dusting his hands. "The door. First. Bolts an old-fashioned sort. Solid iron. When I forced my way in, it showed signs of being engaged. Fresh scratches here on the jamb. Not the sort of bolt to slip by itself." Isa cried. He moved to the window, testing the sash. "Catch is sound. Spring looks clean as a whistle." He paused, frowning, and leaned closer. "Fish? Sardine. By the smell. The catch has been cleaned, recently and thoroughly, except the metal still holds the scent." "That. How extraordinary," Miss Marple said, joining him. "I suppose, in a house where cats are fed on schedule, fish might perfume everything one touches. Though I confess the catch's immaculate appearance makes the scent more than less noticeable. Maidenness is any worse to me, and it seemed that followed is enity enterable." On the mantel stood a wicker hamper with damp straw tucked about its rim. Miss Marple went to it, peered in, and turned a thoughtful glance toward Mrs. Carse. "Veil. A gift from the fishmonger in the next village." "Mrs." Vale explained. "A special order for the darlings? I thought the day would be upsetting enough. What with Mr. Pratt's visit and all the talk of changes, I wanted them content. Thus seizing... Inspector Slack lifted the brass doorstop and turned it over. The green felt on its base was nearly pristine, but a tiny nick stood out, exposing the bright metal beneath, and caught on its edge a fragile fleck of blue. He bent, comparing it to the skirting board. Fresh paint. Exactly the same shade. Either the doorstop was set deliberately against the board, or it struck here with force. This 2-1. From the kitchen came the homely sound of plates set down, the whisper of a cloth, the faint chiming of bells as cats conducted their quiet rounds. Miss Marple listened, her slender head tilted, and the discord Clover's bell sounded again, just enough out of tune to prick the ear. As if summoned by recognition, Clover appeared at the parlour threshold, surveyed the company with regal indifference, and trotted toward the table. The saucer of milk, so carefully placed, received not so much as a glance. Instead, the tortoiseshell lowered her head to the muslin sachet resting near Miss Marple's hand and began to rub herself against the table leg with fervent abandon, purring loud as a little engine. "How curious," Miss Marple said. "She prefers the sachet to the milk." Idmenger. "It's the valerian," Dorcas Finch put in from the doorway. "Doctor," said, "some cats go near mad for it." "I've never seen the like of Clover. Though the others will sniff and pass on. But she acts as if it's well ecstasy." "Do. Lao." Inspector Slack snapped his notebook shut. "What I see is this. A man, dead in a locked room. A door that seems to have been bolted. A window that stinks of fish but looks as though it were polished for a parade. And cats. Bells and cats. Oh, one. Bells and cats," Miss Marple repeated mildly. "And timing. Is the reporty? Timing. Ajustire. Routine," she said. "Tea at certain hours. Feeding at others. A solicitor expected at 3. A housekeeper who lays the numbered saucers in a particular order. In an orderly world, things happen when they are meant to. Those who understand the order can make use of it. 9 have that." Slack looked again at the spring catch. He pressed it open with a thumbnail, then released. It clicked back, neat as a metronome. If the catch were held off the seat somehow, it might look shut and yet be ready to spring closed later. "Is Hadders to speed? Oil would do it," Miss Marple murmured. "Something a cat would remove in the natural course of things. Cats are tremulous tongues and tidy paws. Sardine oil placed upon a catch, for example, would be irresistible to any creature fond of fish. Es nima fecta. Any creature," Slack echoed. "Fond of fish." His eyes drifted to Clover, still intoxicated by the sachet, and his frown deepened. "But this one, if the maid's right, turns her nose up at fish. Is a labza? No, just so," Miss Marple said with satisfaction. "A cat indifferent to sardines is less likely to interfere with a certain arrangement. Meanwhile, Valerian will draw her elsewhere, at the precise moment required." The inspector stared at her. "Required for what? Nice goss. For a little parlour magic?" Miss Marple said gently. "The appearance of a room bolted and a window latched from within after the mischief is done. I want it calm." He regarded the bolt again. Then the tidy cat flap set low in the panel, its brass pivot gleaming. A scuff at skirting level caught his eye. Fresh against the blue paint, He crouched, tracing it with a forefinger. If a fine cord were looped over the bolt's tongue, Slack said slowly, led down to the flap, and thence outside to some weight, the weight could hold the bolt drawn back. Then, if something disturbed the cord, the weight might fall, and the bolt would slide into place. Ah, gravity is as dependable as routine, Miss Marple agreed, and both can be counted on by the ingenious. The menner as me, Dorcas, who had been following this with round eyes, blurted, I found a bit of string yesterday, after the gentleman left, by the cat flap. I thought it clatter and threw it away. Holmes! Inspector Slack's pencil moved at once. You'll show me the bin. The reasoners to late, signed Fisterby. Yes. Sir, if it hasn't been emptied. Miss Marple's gaze returned to the window. The latch gleamed. Spotless. On the outer sill, something pale caught the light. She stepped closer, opened the sash, and leaned out. A tiny drip of white wax clung to the wood, recent and unweathered. She touched it with a careful nail, and it flaked cleanly. Not from any candle used in this room, she said. Mrs. Vale dislikes flames with so many cats. A little work after dark, perhaps. Or, at least, after dusk. Is there this to way? Inspector Slack joined her, sniffed once, and made a face. Fish and wax. If this isn't a conjurer's box, I'll eat my hat. I've so loo. Clover, oblivious to their discoveries, rolled once more against the leg of the table, purring in delirious contentment at the sachet's scent. The bells in the kitchen chimed a homely counterpoint. Miss Marple watched and listened, and in the ordinary music of a cat household she heard the careful beat of an artful design. Inspector, she said at last, very gently, do not, I beg, be too ready to leave this as an accident. It is the tidiness of it all that offends me. My cost, night Eleazar. Tidiness? Well, never. Yes, Miss Marple said. Death is rarely so neat unless someone has tidied it. Chapter 5. The Window's Secret. The inquest was set for the following Tuesday, and in the quiet interval the village hummed with speculation. Some said Mrs. Vale had simply overtaxed her strength. Others whispered of the nephew's anger, and still others declared that Dr. Damet. Cardew's visits were too frequent, his manner too smooth, for all to be innocent. Miss Marple, in her neat parlour at the Elms, listened without comment. She had her knitting, her tea, and her memories of countless human dramas. Yet her thoughts strayed again and again to Catman Cottage, the numbered saucers, the scented sachets, and most of all, the discordant bell. On the morning of the inquest, Inspector Slack returned to the cottage. He was determined to confirm what he already believed, that Mrs. Vale's death was natural, though complicated by the unfortunate collapse of Mr. Pratt. The locked room circumstance still bothered him. However, and he set himself to test every fastening. He drew back the curtains of the blue parlour. The window sash moved easily, but the catch fell into place with a metallic certainty. He sniffed, frowned, and bent closer. The faint sardine odour still lingered, though the sill had been scrubbed. Someone took great pains to make this latch clean, he muttered. Too clean. Oh, that? Miss Marple, who had arrived with Lady Bantry to hear the proceedings, leaned near. Cleanliness, Inspector, can sometimes be a kind of disguise. Dirt tells its tale. But so does the absence of dirt. There's Isabella's. Slack scowled, tugging the latch. You still believe this was arranged? The Semi. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. I seldom believe in accidents when routine has been so carefully established. Cats expect their sources in a certain order. Bells sound in a certain harmony. And doors fasten in a certain way. If anything departs from that pattern, I take notice. Is it? He grunted, dissatisfied, and turned to the hearth. The brass doorstop had been replaced, though its base bore the faint nick Miss Marple had pointed out. He lifted it once more, examining the rim. Lady Bantry gave a little shiver. It is too horrid. Jane, to think of that thing being used as a weapon. Essuierai? Horrid. Yes? Miss Marple said quietly. But one must never shrink from horrid things. They happen, whether we wish them or not. And cease to I... From the kitchen drifted the sound of the cats being fed the chiming of bells. The shuffle of paws. Clover's note clashed again. Louder? Sharper? Miss Marple listened intently. You see, Inspector, she murmured. It is not only the window that has a secret. The bells themselves tell us more than we suppose. Old. Slack straightened, his patience wearing thin. If you mean to suggest that cats can testify at an inquest, Miss Marple, you'll forgive me if I say I've no time for it. But Miss Marple only smiled her mild smile. No? Inspector, cats do not testify. But they bear witness. All the same. Harmonious. The coroner's jury gathered in the parish hall. A dozen farmers and shopkeepers seated with solemn expressions behind the long oak table. The air smelled faintly of damp coats and coal smoke. Outside. A November wind rattled the bare branches against the windows, adding its restless voice to the proceedings. Inspector Slack gave his testimony first. Steady and official. He described Mrs. Vale's sudden collapse, the locked door, the bolted window, and the presence of the maid, Dorcas Finch. He stressed that no sign of forced entry was found. To his mind, heart failure was the obvious verdict. Dr. Haddock followed, repeating his opinion that the deceased had suffered a seizure or faintness and that death was natural, though hastened by shock. He spoke of frailty, of age, of strain. The jury nodded gravely, content with common-sense explanations. Then Dorcas Finch was called. She stumbled through her account of the evening, her hands twisting the hem of her apron. She admitted to bringing in the tea-tray, to hearing her mistress complain of bitterness in the cup, and to finding the door locked when she returned later. Her voice trembled as she repeated Mrs. Vale's final words to her. If anything happens to me, remember the bells. There I be. The jury stirred uneasily at this, glancing toward one another. But the coroner dismissed it as the fancy of an old woman fond of her pets. At last, Miss Marple was invited to give such observations as she might have. She rose, small and neat in her black hat, and inclined her head. I have only this to say, she began in her mild voice, that Mrs. Vale was a woman of routine. Every cat had its numbered saucer. Every bell, its distinct note. She kept her life in perfect order, as neat as her curtains and as precise as her handwriting. When such a woman speaks of bells, I do not think she speaks idly. One? Come, Pa? A faint murmur rustled the hall. Inspector Slack frowned, but the coroner allowed her to continue. I observed. Miss Marple went on. That one bell was different from the others. A harsher note, belonging to the newest cat. Clover, I observed, too, that Clover wore a newer collar than the others, and that she ignored the saucer of milk while showing an unusual delight in the sachets of valerian. That ever you may be any desistimide of the Bratelays, the reigned of the sofa. Her eyes rested for a moment on Dr. Dobb. Cardew, seated in the front row, his genial smile frozen. It seemed to me, Miss Marple concluded gently, that Clover was introduced into the household not for companionship, but for utility, and that the bells, far from being a mere fancy, were part of the means by which Mrs. Vale counted her little family and noticed when something was out of harmony. The jury shifted uncomfortably, and a murmur of speculation rose. The coroner cleared his throat, declaring that while Miss Marple's observations were interesting, the evidence was insufficient for anything beyond a verdict of death by natural causes. The jury delivered it promptly. But as the hall emptied, Miss Marple remained by the fire, her eyes thoughtful. The window's catch, the scent of sardine, the wax upon the sill, the cord by the cat flap all whispered of a hand that had contrived appearances with care. And through it all, the 13th bell rang out, discordant, insistent, refusing to be silenced. When the parish hall had emptied, Miss Marple lingered a little longer, her knitting bag on her lap and her eyes resting quietly on the embers in the grate. Lady Bantry touched her arm. My dear Jane, you looked positively prophetic when you spoke of the bells. But the coroner hardly listened at all. Are you disappointed? His knees wide mend, my seeds, his Mars. Miss Marple shook her head gently. Oh, no. Not disappointed. Inquests rarely uncover truth. They are for verdicts, not for mysteries. But I fancy the truth is still waiting, just as that window waits with its too clean latch. Omens? Lady Bantry shivered. It all gives me the creeps. Sardines. Strings. Bells. Such trifles. Is that? Trifles? Miss Marple echoed softly. Yes. Yet life and death often turn on trifles. The smallest thread may bind the strongest bolt, and a little oil may trick even an honest spring. I think, dear Dolly, that our trifles will add up to something quite dreadful. At that moment, Inspector Slack reappeared, stomping his boots against the chill. He looked annoyed, as though the day's proceedings had left him with indigestion. You made an impression, Miss Marple, he said brusquely. But impressions won't serve in court. I've got a dead woman. An old solicitor cracked his head. And a doctor who says heart failure. That's my case. I do said, yes, Inspector. Miss Marple agreed mildly. It is your case. And yet, if you will forgive me, there is still the matter of harmony. Bryce! Harmony. His note was Fraser's. The bells, Miss Marple said. All alike but one. When one note is wrong, it spoils the tune. And when the tune is spoiled, we are forced to ask why. The Rossi. Slack gave a grunt, half exasperated, half uncertain. I'll keep my ear open. But if you think I'm chasing cats through every cottage in the county, you're mistaken. His seat is a blend. Miss Marple smiled serenely. No need. Inspector? The cats will come to us when the time is right. Is tea? They stepped out into the dusk, the wind carrying the faint chime of a bell from the cottage down the lane. A discordant note, harsh and sharp against the evening hush. Miss Marple paused, listening, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly. Do you hear it? Dolly, she said softly. That bell is telling us something. We must learn its language. As Noding Vors and his pre-sisters lie. And with that, they walked on into the gathering dark, while behind them Catman Cottage stood silent, its windows glowing faintly through the mist, as if watching, waiting, guarding its secret. Chapter 6. The Cat Who Refused Sardines. The following morning broke grey and wet, a thin drizzle veiling the fields in damp mist. Miss Marple, snug in her cottage with her knitting, was not surprised when Lady Bantry arrived, cheeks flushed from the cold. Jane, you must come with me, Lady Bantry announced, pulling off her gloves. There's talk everywhere about Mrs. Vale's cats. Apparently one of them has taken ill, and Dorcas Finch is beside herself. She sent a message to Dr. Cardew at once. Doesn't that strike you as odd? I know. Is bad this time? Miss Marple set down her knitting carefully. It does indeed. Dolly. Which cat? Do you know? And well, the new one. Clover. The one with the dreadful bell. I'd. Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. Ah. Yes. Clover. That is most interesting. Let us pay a visit. Shall we? There's Sulby L&S. Catman Cottage looked forlorn beneath the drizzle, its lace curtains limp with damp, the gravel path spattered with puddles. Dorcas Finch opened the door at once, her apron damp at the hem and her face pale. Oh, Miss Marple? Lady Bantry, thank heaven you've come. Clover's poorly. She won't touch her sardines, though the others are clamouring as usual. She just lies there, eyes half shut, purring 1 minute and shivering the next. This coos, not an aya. Miss Marple followed Dorcas to the kitchen, where the cats milled about their numbered saucers. Bells chimed like a discordant orchestra, yet one note was missing. Clover lay apart, her tortoise-shell fur dull, her bell silent against her chest. A saucer of sardines sat untouched before her, the silvery fish, glistening. Miss Marple bent to observe. Clover's whiskers twitched faintly, but she turned her head from the food. How curious, Miss Marple murmured. A cat that refuses sardines. That's seeded, and had of the make of the store exapered, he's might have known Hastings. Doctor! Cardew arrived briskly, carrying his black case. His manner was smooth as ever, his voice reassuring. Nothing to alarm you. Dorcas. Cats are temperamental creatures. This one will be right as rain after a tonic. Has come, Blayton. He knelt, examined Clover swiftly, then produced a small vial, a draught of valerian and restorative herbs. She will perk up soon enough. His Eind, his curs. Miss Marple's eyes did not leave him. You seem very ready with Valerian. Doctor. Is... He looked up sharply. Naturally. It soothes the nerves, human or feline. Ice. Indeed. Miss Marple said mildly, though I have always thought that too much soothing may become disturbing. Ah. Bah. Then ah. Dorcas, flustered, fetched a cloth and fresh saucer. The other cats finished their sardines. Bells. Chiming. Harmony restored, except for that one silent note. Miss Marple lingered near Clover, watching the little creature's flank rise and fall. The bell around her neck gleamed new and bright, its clapper faintly tarnished. Tell me, Dorcas, she said gently, who placed this collar upon Clover? Monsieur? Why? Dr. Cardew? Miss. He brought it with her when he gave her to Mrs. Vale. Said every cat ought to have its bell. And my doors. Miss Marple's knitting-bag hands folded primly. Yes, every cat should indeed, and perhaps one bell more than all the rest. Has eyed. Her gaze met Lady Bantry's for a moment, and the unspoken understanding passed between them. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, at Catman Cottage. And Clover, the cat who refused sardines, might be the key to it all. That evening, Miss Marple returned alone to Catman Cottage under the pretext of bringing Dorcas a jar of her own quince jelly. The drizzle had ceased, but a damp mist still curled low over the hedgerows. In the kitchen, the cats were restless, weaving between Dorcas's skirts and chiming their bells in uneven chorus. Clover lay still, her eyes glassy yet watchful. The untouched sardines had been removed, replaced with a saucer of milk into which Dorcas had crumbled a sachet of valerian. She won't touch that either, Dorcas fretted. And the others, they're growing fractious, crying at the doors, scratching at the curtains. They miss Mrs. Vale. Poor souls. You know, Miss Marple's gaze softened, but her mind was alert. She sat primly, her hands folded, and observed. At last she said, Would you indulge an old woman's fancy? Dorcas. Might we try Clover with plain milk untouched by powders or herbs? Hazar. He was not has had. Dorcas blinked, but complied. A fresh saucer was poured. To her surprise, Clover rose, tottered, and lapped eagerly, the bell at her throat chiming faintly. There now, Miss Marple murmured. You see, it was not the milk that displeased her, only the addition. Nost. Dorcas looked startled. But Dr. Cardew himself told me valerian was soothing. Is ever? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her voice was grave. Soothing? Yes, but too much of anything. Dorcas ceases to soothe. It poisons. Do you go? The maid crossed herself hastily. You don't mean... So just now. Miss Marple shook her head. Not yet. Only that Clover has told us something without words. We must listen carefully. Animals, like children, cannot reason, but they act with honesty. That is often more instructive than all the cleverness in the world. You are there. I esti day. At that moment, a heavy knock came at the door. It was Gavin Vale, his coat damp, his face drawn. He looked at Miss Marple with suspicion. You again, forever poking about in what doesn't concern you. Bimos. Miss Marple's smile was faint. On the contrary, Mr. Vale, death in a small parish concerns us all. My mercentu is not her, eventual formanian. His eyes flicked toward the cats. Then away. Well, whatever you think you know, you'll keep it to yourself, or you'll regret it. With that, he strode out into the mist, leaving a trace of tobacco smoke behind him. Dorcas shivered. He's bitter as wormwood. That one? But you don't think he is frem? Miss Marple's needles clicked softly within her bag. I think, she said, that bitterness and guilt often wear the same expression. But for the moment, my dear, let us attend to Clover. She may yet teach us the truth. I ma. They ove go. And as the little cat finished her plain milk, the faint, discordant note of her bell sounded again, sharper than all the rest, like a warning struck in miniature brass. 2 days later, word spread quickly through St. Townel. Mary Mead, that Clover had recovered. The tortoiseshell was once again weaving among the others, her bell chiming with its harsh metallic note. Yet Miss Marple's satisfaction was tempered with unease. She paid another visit to Catman Cottage, this time accompanied by Lady Bantry. Dorcas welcomed them gratefully, reporting that Clover now ate heartily, though only from saucers free of valerian. Miss Marple asked if she might see the sachets themselves. Dorcas brought a small tin, half filled with little muslin bags tied with thread. Miss Marple untied one, held it delicately to her nose, and sniffed. Valerian? Yes, she murmured, but something else. A bitterness, faint but present. She set it down with care. This mixture was altered. End quote. Lady Bantry frowned. But who would bother to tamper with herbs for cats? Manny? Anduna? Miss Marple did not answer. She was listening. All around them. Bells chimed as the cats fed. Clear. Harmonious notes save for Clover's jarring tone. Suddenly, Miss Marple crossed to the cupboard, pulled open a drawer, and produced Clover's collar. She turned it over in her hand, examining the bell closely. A tiny smear of dark residue marked the hinge. She touched it with a handkerchief and sniffed. Her eyes grew grave. It is as I feared, she whispered. The bell itself is no mere trinket. It has been treated, and every time Clover bent her head to eat or drink, a trace of that substance fell into her dish, into the milk, into whatever lay beneath. Lotusy! Dorcas gasped, paling. But then Mrs. cried. Vale herself is gay. Miss Marple nodded slowly. She doted on Clover. Did she not? Always coaxing her, always sharing titbits. She would have taken what Clover refused. And in doing so, she took in poison meant not for the cat, but for herself. His mediantus debilienti, I'd all fire a fiso. Lady Bantry clutched her friend's arm. Jane. That means... Yes? Miss Marple said softly. Someone contrived this bell with deadly purpose. Clover's refusal of sardines saved her life. But Mrs. Vale's indulgence cost her own. Is moo. The kitchen seemed suddenly cold, though the fire burned bright. The cats lapped at their saucers. The bells rang out, and Clover's discordant chime struck through the harmony like a knell. Miss Marple straightened, her eyes bright with resolve. "We must discover whose hand placed this collar upon Clover, for in that answer lies the name of a murderer." 8. Chapter 7. At the Veterinary Surgery. Doctor in. Cardew's surgery stood behind the main street, in what had once been a stable block. Its brickwork handsomely pointed, and the yard swept as clean as a scullery floor. A boy exercised a convalescent horse in slow circles, the animal's breath white in the chilly air, while a fox terrier dozed on a mat by the back step. Inside, the waiting bench was polished by generations of anxious owners, and the walls were tidy with framed certificates and photographs of prize calves and pampered spaniels. "Miss Marple," cried Dr. Ware. Cardew, appearing from a consultation room with his sleeves neatly rolled and his smile in place. "An unexpected pleasure. How may I serve you?" "Loza, I have come." "Doctor, on a matter of curiosity," Miss Marple replied, her eyes moving lightly over the immaculate counter, the numbered drawers, the row of leashes hanging like a regiment on parade. "A friend's cat in London has altered her habits rather oddly. She refuses fish now, though she was once devoted to sardines. I wondered if you might advise what could bring about such a change. And this Cradjingolo was ifuma." "Ah," he said, leading her into the inner room with an air of professional briskness. "Finickiness is the curse of the feline temperament. Illness sometimes, trauma sometimes, and not infrequently a mere whim that no science can chart." He gestured to a chair. "Allow me to show you a few things that help our more delicate patients." "My, he is comst of the malice." It was a model room for a man of orderly mind. Shelves carried bottles and phials in precise ranks. Scalpels and forceps lay on a green baize tray, each aligned to a hair. A row of small brass bells gleamed in a shallow wooden drawer left half open, and Miss Marple drifted toward them as though by chance. "How charming," she said. "Do you keep them in stock for your clients?" "As son." "Indeed," said Doctor Cardew, with a touch of pride. "Various sizes and tones. Some households keep to tradition. A bell's note can be a most practical identifier. Into watching do." Miss Marple's finger hovered above the array. The bells were arranged by pitch, from bright and treble to mellow and low. But one cradle in the sequence was empty, the felt-lined hollow showing a clean oval in the dust. "You are missing one," she observed almost apologetically. He colored a little. "Yes. I supplied a replacement last week. One develops a crack, and the tone goes false. I dislike false notes." "Is two here?" "Quite," said Miss Marple. "So misleading to the ear. This might a six, then might a sicray." Her gaze moved next to a neat stack of narrow reels, each a coil of fine waxed cord. "Such excellent order," she murmured. "Professional necessity," he answered lightly. "Emergency restraints for the larger sort. The cord is strong, yet kind. As earned, kindness is so important." Miss Marple agreed, and her glance slid to a curious contrivance on the bench, a clockwork frame with a covered dish and a ratchet dial. "And this ingenious item?" "Is Cambe, an automatic feeder." "Tak," Cardew said, pleased to instruct. "For clients obliged to be away. One sets the hour and portion. The mechanism is accurate to the minute if properly maintained. His hand, like a reliable servant, Miss Marple said. Only with springs instead of common sense. Isoline's. He laughed, but his eyes had grown a shade more guarded. Miss Marple, who never frowned and rarely stared, merely allowed her attention to drift around the room, as if admiring a well-kept pantry. A small line of recovery cages stood along one wall with tidy placards above each door. Most were empty. One bore a card with a name written in a precise hand. Clover, Miss Marple read aloud. Such a pretty name. Isno Istuwe. Yes, said Doctor. Cardew more quickly than before. A stray I placed with Mrs. Vale. The cage was hers for a night or two. After treatment. A sad little case at first, but fortunate. Very fortunate. To find so devoted a home. Or is Nova? How fortunate indeed, Miss Marple said, and let the matter pass. On the desk lay a ledger with narrow lines and small, exact figures. She admired the penmanship a moment, then noticed, as one notices a snag in fine knitting, a place where the date had been corrected too heavily for so small an error. The second numerals written over the first. One must be meticulous in records, she remarked. I find if I do not write the day properly in my little book, my mutton is overdone and my geraniums left to freeze. Hezehimes. Quite, he said, closing the ledger with genial decision. Corrections must be made when they are necessary. There's form in his soul. They stepped back into the yard. There, by the refuse pile neatly contained in a wooden bin, something caught Miss Marple's eye, a small, weathered collar with a bell attached. She lifted it delicately. The leather was softened with honest wear, and when she rang the bell it gave a clear, sweet note that seemed at once familiar, harmonious, assured. The very sound of Mrs. Vale's kitchen before the discord. You have dropped something, she said, holding it out. Ah, yes, he replied, a fraction too late, and with a brightness slightly too polished. It belonged to a patient who no longer required it. I meant to dispose of it properly. And he said the Frenchy. Whose ma the ready own it is? How wasteful, Miss Marple murmured. It is so very well made, and the tone is well true. Laws, one laws lay varm. True? He echoed, and in his smile there was the tiniest crack, like a hairline in brass that only the ear could detect. Miss Marple thanked him prettily for his advice on finicky cats and took her leave. As she went, she passed once more through the waiting-room where the boy with the horse paused to tug his forelock, and the fox terrier thumped its tail without waking. Out in the lane she walked very slowly, thinking of a missing bell from a tidy drawer, of coils of cord, of a clockwork feeder that did exactly as it was told, and of a collar with a true note cast aside among peelings and straw. Guilty knowledge, she reflected, not for the first time was a poor actor. It always missed its cue by a heartbeat, or bowed too low, or smiled too hard, and when one listened for it, one could hear the floor as clearly as a false bell in a choir. Chapter 8. Numbers that do not match. Miss Marple returned to St. Posse. Mary Mead with her thoughts arranged as neatly as her knitting needles. She spent the evening at her parlour table, setting down figures in her tiny notebook. 13 cats. 13 bells. 13 saucers. Yet one saucer was always marked by refusal. and one bell by discord. The next morning she called upon Dorcas Finch at Catman Cottage. Dorcas was scrubbing the scullery floor. Her sleeves rolled high, and her face anxious. "Oh, Miss Marple, it's no good," Dorcas said at once. "The cats are restless. They scratch and fight, and I can't keep the saucers straight." "Mrs.?" Vale always had a system, each cat its own saucer, numbered beneath. But now, she wrung her hands, I've muddled them. Now. Miss Marple bent to examine the saucers stacked on the dresser. She turned them one by one. Numbers were written faintly on the base, in pencil 1, 2, 3 up to 13. Yet one saucer bore 2 faint numbers, one rubbed out and another written over it. "Ah," she murmured. "Alteration. This is a rending." Dorcas looked bewildered. "Do you think it matters?" "Miss, a saucer's a saucer. After all, Maffins. Miss Marple's eyes softened. "My dear, in a household of such order, nothing is ever altered without reason. It matters very much." "Iso, us tu notavis turisam tiv." They carried the saucers back to the kitchen, setting them out in a neat row. The cats gathered eagerly, bells chiming, tails twitching. Each went to its accustomed dish without hesitation except Clover. She circled uncertainly, sniffed, then sat back with a sharp mew. Miss Marple nodded. Yes, she knows. The saucer is wrong. The street. At that moment, Lady Bantry arrived, cheeks pink with excitement. "Jane, you'll never believe it. Inspector Slack is quite put out. The solicitor, Mr. Pratt, has sworn that Mrs. Vale's codicil was witnessed only days before her death. Gavin has stormed about saying it will never stand, and Slack says it's all nonsense. Natural causes? But he looks pale as a ghost when anyone mentions poison. His Amana. There's of good John." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "That is most revealing. For if Inspector Slack, who scorns all subtleties, looks pale at the word poison, then someone has whispered it in his ear already. Iscrected is the 4 by ours." She lifted Clover's saucer once more. Turning it over, she traced the rubbed-out numeral beneath. The first number had been 7, hastily altered to 13. "Numbers," Miss Marple said softly. "They never quite lie. They leave their ghosts behind. These as a inzy bredge of. Lady Bantry peered over her shoulder. "But what does it mean?" "Jane, I knew just." Miss Marple set the saucer down gently, her eyes bright. "It means that Mrs. Vale was not merely poisoned. She was deceived into believing that all her household remained in harmony, 13 cats, 13 saucers, 13 bells. But in truth, the count was wrong. One number was altered, and with it, the balance of her little world. The bells chimed again as the cats fed, their notes rising and falling. And through the chorus, Clover's bell rang out once more false, discordant, like a hand striking the wrong key upon a piano. Chapter 9. The Bolt at Tea Time. It was a raw November afternoon, the kind that pressed mist against the windows and turned the lanes into narrow rivers of mud. Miss Marple accepted Lady Bantry's invitation to tea at Gossington Hall, but before the cups were poured, Inspector Slack himself was shown in. His boots were thick with clay, his face flushed with vexation. "Another fuss, Miss Marple," he announced brusquely. "Dorcas Finch has raised the devil at Catman Cottage. Says the back parlour door fastened itself when no one was near it. Nonsense. Of course. But the village is in a state. The fine, no. These Anyfers is. Doors, Miss Marple said mildly, are curious creatures. They sometimes tell tales if one listens. Haven't they? Slack snorted. But Lady Bantry was intrigued. Do let us go, Jane. It will liven up this dreary day. Ah, the parlour at Catman Cottage smelled faintly of soot and damp roses. Dorcas stood wringing her apron, pale with fright. It was just after I set down the tea-tray. Ma'am, I went to fetch the milk jug, and when I came back, the door was bolted on the inside. I swear, no one touched it. I... Slack inspected the bolt. Stout. Brass. Freshly polished. He tugged it up and down with unnecessary force. Perfectly sound. Likely you forgot you shot it yourself. Hastings. No. Sir? Dorcas cried. It slid down of its own accord, and the cats they yowled dreadfully. And Shell? Indeed. The cats were gathered restlessly about the hearth, their bells jangling an uneasy chorus. Clover crouched apart, her discordant note striking like a cracked gong. Miss Marple bent, peering at the bolt. The polish was uneven. A faint smear of wax marked the metal. She rubbed it with a finger, sniffed delicately. Wax, she murmured. With a thread, perhaps. One ties it, pulls gently, at the right moment. And see, the bolt falls of its own accord. She demonstrated with a strand of knitting wool, and the bolt slid home with a sharp click. Lady Bantry gasped. But that would mean anyone outside the room could lock it from within. It sizzed. Precisely, Miss Marple said. A most useful trick, if one wished to suggest solitude or impossibility. And as Cations, Slack scowled. Contrived nonsense. No jury would give it a thought. There, Sayer. Perhaps not. Miss Marple agreed. But cats give thought to curious things. They dislike disruptions of habit. You know. And Mrs. Vale's household was nothing if not habitual. A sudden bolt, a sudden false note. It unsettled them, as it unsettled her. Visory, as if in answer. Clover rose suddenly, padded to the door, and struck the bolt with her paw. The discordant bell rang loud, and the bolt shivered in its socket. Miss Marple straightened. There is your witness. Inspector. Clover remembers what we might forget. And she has no reason to lie. Assez. Slack shifted uneasily, though his tone remained gruff. I'll allow. It looks peculiar. But peculiar is not proof. 9, they of 9. Miss Marple smiled faintly. No, Inspector. Peculiar is never proof. It is only the beginning of understanding. And elation Dei. Outside, the mist thickened, muffling the sound of the bells. Within, however, the single false chime continued to jar the harmony of Catman Cottage. A discord that could no longer be ignored. Chapter 10. The 13th Secret Revealed. The church bells of St. Mary Mead tolled softly on Sunday morning, their notes drifting across fields still veiled in mist. Villagers gathered in pews, whispering of Mrs. Now, Vale's death, of her cats, and of the odd business with Clover's bell. Lady Bantry sat beside Miss Marple, who bowed her head during the prayers, but whose sharp eyes missed little. When the service ended, Inspector Slack approached them outside the lich gate, his face set in a mixture of irritation and reluctant respect. "I've spoken with the solicitor again. Pratt swears Mrs. Vale changed her will at her own insistence, leaving nearly everything to the animal hospital. That leaves Gavin with a mere pittance. He's wild with fury. Of course. But there's no proof of foul play. He's planned. No proof yet," Miss Marple corrected gently. "But proofs are like weeds. One must look in the right corners to find them. Hefton, there is knotted with they." That afternoon, Miss Marple invited Lady Bantry, Inspector Slack, Dr. Cardew, Gavin Vale, and Dorcas Finch to the blue parlour of Catman Cottage. The cats prowled uneasily, their bells creating a fragile music. Clover sat apart, her discordant note striking through the rest. Miss Marple folded her hands. "It is time, I think, that we consider the matter plainly. Mrs. Vale did not die of her heart alone. She died because poison was placed where she would find it on Clover's bell." "See." Dorcas gasped. Gavin turned pale, then red. Dr. Cardew's smile did not falter, but his fingers tightened on the arm of his chair. Miss Marple continued softly, her voice as even as a church psalm. Clover refused the tainted sardines, but Mrs. Vale, anxious for her newest pet, coaxed her with morsels. In doing so, she swallowed what Clover would not. The poison fell each time the bell was shaken above the dish. The mechanism was simple, the deception subtle, and the hand that fastened that collar belongs to Dr. Cardew. A shocked silence fell. The cats stirred, their bells chiming nervously. Cardew laughed. A brittle sound. "Preposterous. Why would I wish harm to a harmless old woman? Is the Saints kenning Canadgy?" Miss Marple's eyes were grave. "Because Mrs. Vale was altering her will. The codicil left the bulk of her estate not to kin, nor to any human beneficiary, but to an institution. And yet, someone was deeply in need of funds, someone whose accounts show recent irregularities. There is no in speeding to Heisted." She drew a small folded slip from her reticule. "In your ledger, Doctor." The dates were changed. Payments were concealed. I remarked it at once. Peer. Cardew's face darkened. "Idle gossip. Circumstantial." Slack stepped forward, his hand firm. "That will do. Doctor, we'll have your statement at the station, and I'll wager the chemist can match what's on that bell to what was in Mrs. Vale's veins. There. As the inspector led him away, Clover's bell rang once more. The sound was shrill, discordant, like a verdict passed down by fate. Later, Miss Marple and Lady Bantry sat quietly by the fire. The cats, calmer now, dozed in gentle harmony. Only Clover, restored to health, purred with her false bell still about her neck. "You were right all along, Jane." Lady Bantry sighed. The 13th bell was the key. Miss Marple smiled faintly, her needles clicking once more. Evil often hides beneath the ordinary. Dolly, one must only listen closely to bells, to habits, to the smallest of discordant notes. They always tell the truth. If one is patient. Aye. The fire crackled. The mist pressed softly against the windows. And Catman Cottage settled once more into silence, its secrets laid bare, its harmony restored.